Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Rhonda, Studnick Kaiser, and I'll be hosting our webinar today, our new webinar format, BigFix Decoded. We are recording today's webinar. If this presents you with any concerns, please drop at this time. You'll be able to access a recording of the event about an hour after we conclude. Simply follow the same registration link that you used to join us, and you'll instead access the recording of the event. You can also share your link with colleagues who might not have been able to join. They'll be presented with a registration page, and then we'll be able to access the recording. We do encourage you to ask questions throughout the course of the event today. Just add your questions to the chat and we'll answer in the chat, or we'll feed your questions to the presenter at the appropriate time. With that, let me quickly go through some introductions and a little bit of information here. One thing I want to tell you is that this is the first of our BigFix Decoded series. This series has moved to a monthly cadence, so you will find on the last Wednesday of every month one of our BigFix Decoded webinars. So the next one after today is the 27th of March. Thank leap year that it's not the 28th. It'll be one day later, one day earlier on the 27th of March. And with me today, I have John Talbert, Director for BigFix Professional Services, Gary Louw, who is from our BigFix Professional Services team, and Joe Saylor from our BigFix Accelerated Value Program. So as I mentioned, this is a new and different kind of webinar. It is new and improved. So this used to be our Get More Done with BigFix webinar. We've been working really hard to get you more from your experience with this content, so you'll notice a lot of changes starting today. Not just the name, but you'll find us. You'll see us actually in our ongoing webinar series. More engaging content, more interactive conversations, and more of the why behind the content we're providing. So we really just want to dig deeper into the things our customers care about most. So let's dive in. So Joe, maybe we can start with kind of framing our conversation today. You know, why people care about PowerShell and ActionScript within BigFix.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it really all comes down to leverage. There's two like basic people that are probably interested in this, and they're kind of on opposing sides of a great big like teeter-totter kind of lever. We have the BigFix professionals, which probably most of us are on the call, I would imagine, since we have BigFix in the title. You know, these are the people who are operators or administrators that need to just get stuff done quickly, and they want to make use of all of the massive amounts of PowerShell that are out there. You know, relevance and ActionScript has been around for quite some time, of course, and if you just Google up your problem in ActionScript, you'll probably get a result. But if you Google up your problem in PowerShell, you will get a result. And so being able to leverage all of that stuff that's just out there on the internet is like a fast way to make BigFix more valuable to the BigFix operator.
Right. And for those people who are PowerShell experts, if you have BigFix in your environment and you want to get something done really fast, turning that PowerShell over to your BigFix admins to push out, that is a very fast way of doing it. And that's certainly something that when I was in charge of what was being deployed for BigFix in a very large environment, I can't tell you the number of times I got PowerShell given to me. Do this, take this action. So I think that that's very important. So really there's two sides of the coin here. The business that wants to have something done, wants to take an action, wants to set something up, wants to deploy, I don't know, we'll see what kinds of things we can deploy over the course of the session today. And then the people who are actually taking the actions through the BigFix console.
And one important thing to note about the PowerShell side of this equation, there's of course a lot of PowerShell skills out there. Just a massive talent pool, and so it's great to be able to leverage that, but there are some BigFix specific things that all of us BigFix people really take for granted that we'll be going into later in more detail, I'm sure. But you know, there's some very basic things that the BigFix client does to your PowerShell that changes how it behaves. You know, for instance, it runs as the local system account, which when you're testing your PowerShell in your environment, you're probably not using the system account just by default. So that can really change how it behaves. Testing in the system context gets really important for your PowerShell people before they hand off their scripts. And then the client also does 32-bit redirection from the 64-bit operating stuff. That means like if you're touching the registry, if you've ever seen in like the HT local machine software node, the WOW 6432 node, that's where all the 32-bit stuff goes. And so any of your registry PowerShell stuff is going to go to that node instead of the primary one that doesn't have that prefix. Same with like program files. Everybody's seen program files x86. We would redirect anytime you try to talk to program files in PowerShell, we're going to redirect it to the x86 version of that program instead. So these are all things you really aren't obvious and kind of have to be aware of. That again, the BigFix people, we know that in our bones. Everybody's been burned by it at some point. But the PowerShell people coming at it from the other side are, we want to stop you from getting burned. I prefer not to see people immolated. That's my goal in life.
Definitely. All right. So I think at this point we're going to turn things over to Mr. Talbert. I will say that this is live TV. So we are doing this without a net, akin to walking across the Grand Canyon on a tightrope. So bear with us, but let's give it to John.
Hey, thanks, Rhonda. Thanks, Joe. One of the things that we come across in BigFix deployment space is around testing for connectivity, network connectivity. We get one of the things that we run into sometimes is UDP blockage. With TCP blockage, it's kind of easy to just ping something. There's a built-in tool in most operating systems to test that, but there's not really so much for UDP. Fortunately, there's a PowerShell script out on the BigFix wiki here. It's the UDP check utility. And this could be any PowerShell that we're showing, but this one's going to do some work for us. The thing about this script is it's one script that works in two modes, and there's let me make this a little bit bigger maybe. There we go. One script, it's a PowerShell script. It works in two modes, either the server mode or the client mode. And in the client mode, it picks an endpoint, and that'll be the server that you're interacting with. And there's a port that it's going to listen to. So those things we're going to need to sort through in a little bit. But in the meantime, I'm just going to download the PowerShell. Here we go. And I'm going to pop the PowerShell open in Notepad++. Just happens to be the editor that I like. And get rid of that one.
It's the editor of all civilized peoples.
I think there are probably others, but I don't involve. I try not to engage in politics or religion in these type of events. So we've got this PowerShell, and we want to use it in BigFix. This one's designed to take 3 entry parameters, but I'm not actually going to have an opportunity to pass those parameters. So I'm going to actually edit this, and I'm going to basically say the mode is server mode. Okay, and that the endpoint, since this is server mode, it's actually going to ignore this one. So I'm just going to leave this one alone. And then 52311 is the port I want to test. And it's going to test UDP on 52311. This is going to be the server that, that gets set up. So I've got this piece. Let me take all of this. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to bring it over to my BigFix console. And I'm going to Tools, create a new Fixlet. And there we go. And this is going to be my PowerShell.
And for all of you like recoiling at the idea of hard-coded stuff, we're about to show you the difference between these two, but there is native PowerShell and native ActionScript in BigFix Actions nowadays. And when you use native PowerShell, that's where we can't actually do any parameterization. So that's why we're hard-coding it for this one.
Absolutely. Yep. Paste that in there. Oh, hold on a second. This says BigFix ActionScript. That's actually not what I want to use. I want to use not Apple script. I want PowerShell. So when I select this, I can paste in native PowerShell, and that's what's going to be executed. Okay.
And the really cool thing about this is that it takes care of absolutely everything else for you. You know, when you run stuff through ActionScript, there's a little bit of pre-check, a little bit of post-check you got to do. So there's some additions, but this will take any PowerShell from the internet, just straight copy paste and do the thing on your endpoint.
Okay, so I'll give myself a little description. Let's, I'll put it in the webinar fund content site I have locally. Okay, and I think this is looking good. Yeah, I do want only computers that are Windows, because if it's not Windows, it might not have PowerShell. So let me do that. Computers which match operating system contains Win. Let's do that. Okay, so that's my first of 2 fixlets that's going to help me do this testing. And just waiting for that to finish baking, and we're going to create a second fixlet to be our client, because we're testing UDP between 2 elements. Okay, so that's the first one. So tools, I'm going to create a new fixlet, and then I'm going to create a variation that is the, what did I call this one? This was called PowerShell UDP client is what I want to call this one.
While John's setting that up, Rhonda, you know, maybe we should talk a bit more about why this one's super important.
Oh, yeah.
It's really the network team, right? Like, I'm sure you've had experience with network teams.
Yeah, my recommendation always, if you are involved with BigFix in any way, is make sure that you have good friends on your network team. Networks, as we know, change, especially in large organizations. They change without your knowledge. And certainly, even though there are templates and runbooks and things like that for setting up, you know, any new network device, that doesn't mean that it's always set up correctly, right? So human error, whatever, things happen. And so in this case, yeah, this is one that you're having a conversation about why something isn't making it to your client, and you're showing your network team that this is why it's not working.
Yeah, and UDP specifically is kind of ephemeral. When it doesn't work, it's not as obvious as when TCP communication doesn't work. And you can tell your network team over and over again that it's not open, it's not working the way it's supposed to, your clients are not getting notifications. And it's really easy for them to tell you things that are suspiciously similar to lies about UDP's connectivity. And this is a way to prove it. And proof is always what gets you somewhere. Just, you know, asking and begging, in my experience, doesn't do the thing. But when you can say, hey, here's my test, now I need you to fix it, that's what will always get you somewhere.
Absolutely.
All right, so I got 2 fixlets set up now. And hey, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong. I want to run the server is going to listen and the client is going to send.
That is correct, yes. So the server would replace the agent. So you'd stop your agent service, release the UDP port on 52311. You would then start this server, which will bind to the UDP port 52311. And then the client would behave as the relay would when sending out the UDP notification to the agent.
Nice. Okay. So give me a second. I need to change my display size so that I can fit both of these things on one screen. And I'm going to bring up this computer green here so we can kind of see what's going on this computer. There we go. And there's my desktop. And where is it? This PC, local disk. Okay, so let me get to my BigFix server, or my client here, enterprise, as client. Okay, so I've got the Bez client. Oops, let's get to the log files just so I can kind of keep an eye on the logs here. And let's Notepad++. I think there's a tail utility I can use there. Yeah, if I tell it to watch and then I go to the end, I should watch for new stuff coming in. Okay. And it looks like, yeah, the new fixlets I created they made it down here, so that's a good sign. So that's my green computer, and this one's going to be the one I send the listener to, I think, because Brawley is going to send to green using this client. So I need the server to run on green and the client will ping to green. So let's get that going. So fixlets, where's my prior fixlet here? Console's a little bit slow today for me. And where's my fixlet? There's server. Okay, so this is the server. I'm going to take action and I'm going to set the server up on green. And there's green, and I'm just going to fire this thing. This is a test listening. All right, this should pop up on my green. Let's see. Oh, my capacity scan just ran. ILMT inventory. So let's see, we should get, there's the gather hash and processing the site. I want to make sure we get this server set up. Hey, it's starting the action.
Oh, not relevant.
We got a, well, not relevant's normal. We got an
Oh, that's right.
One. One of the things I want to point out here, though, is when this executed, it executed against PowerShell, hidden window, with the bypass execution policy, and it used this temporary PowerShell that it created on the endpoint. So it's doing essentially what you would do in an ActionScript, but it's all doing it for you.
One thing to note about the execution policy tag there is that most endpoints today have policies set up so they cannot run signed PowerShell scripts, just as a security precaution. And so anytime you go to run something arbitrary like what we're doing in PowerShell here with our action, is it will just be not allowed, like just denied by your policy. So it will immediately fail. And this is something that like a PowerShell person would run into if they tried to do like an action script, because unless you specify that execution policy bypass in your action script, when you call your PowerShell script, it just won't work. And the whole reason that you were allowed to bypass it is back to that quirk of the client where we're running as the local system. So we have full administrative access to the system whenever we run a command, and so we are allowed to enable the execution policy bypass. If you run this as a user, you almost certainly won't be allowed to unless like you have an elevated command prompt open.
Okay. So I'm going to take action on the client version of this, and I noticed that I'd made my copy in master action site, so I copied it over into the webinar site. So that'll take just a minute before I get applicable computers coming up here, but it should be applicable based on the Windows in just a moment. And I'm going to run this on Brawley, which is my local box here. And I'm just going to run this with a message, just so we see something happening on this side. There we go. There's a before. There's a during. There we go. And targeting the Brawley machine here. Let me see if I can get my Notepad++ up before that fires. And looks like it was successful in getting it up before it, that's the wrong time. I've got the wrong log open. There we go. And I know I've missed it by now. Relevant PowerShell post, there's the version difference. I don't see it running yet, so we may have beat it to the punch. Good. So in a moment, we should see the second PowerShell run on the second box, which should result in the first box coming back up. Because part of what the script does, because it has to listen on 52.3.11, it's going to shut down the agent on the box, which is also listening on 52.3.11 temporarily, to listen, so that when the sender sends, the listening script will get a copy of it, and it will, as part of its shutdown, it'll drop a log, and it'll then restart the BigFix agent. So we should see the agent come back up on that box. But I've not seen this come across yet. So in the true spirit of live demos,
something happened.
And this is definitely Brawley box. Let me go back and look at my action script here, or my action here. I don't have a reply here yet from the client. It is possible that I have a UDP problem here, in which case we're going to detect it, and my other PowerShell is not going to get the message because I've got a UDP problem. Very possible that I have that on my network.
And this is a pretty classic example of a UDP problem. The whole thing that we get out of having UDP open is notifications to the client. So whenever new content comes out, if UDP is open, we'll respond to it right away because the client says, hey, there's new stuff. If UDP is closed, then the client has to wait for whatever you have configured as your default passive gather interval, which is usually about a day. I don't know that we have enough time to wait a day right now. So John's doing the other workaround.
Yeah. So balance the client will force it to assume that it's missed some notifications and should grab this and fire it off. Unless I've missed something, which is possible.
Did you change the relevancy on the Fixlet? I wasn't watching when you created it.
I did. So here's the client that I've executed, and there's the relevance operating system. And I do have applicable computers, so I know that it should be applicable. And I've changed this to client, this to green, and this was already 52.3.11 integer. So that should fire just nicely as well. And I should see in the client log. Oh,
there you go. So I think UDP is closed. What a great test.
Yes. So PowerShell UDP client is trying to act right now. I'm not going to take the restart now action because I've got a patch Tuesday. You know, my auto patch is taking care of that for me. So I'm going to take this action only, which should, in the client log, we should see that action get launched as PowerShell. And there's my during message. And we should see some activity in the log here.
One thing to note about logs, and I suppose we can't actually do this with native PowerShell, but if you're using an ActionScript, you can change how much data is shown in the log here. By default, it's pretty bare bones for security reasons. You know, you don't want to expose necessarily all of the parameters for every action. But in your ActionScript, if you use the action log all command, it will give you a really verbose output while you're staring at client logs here, waiting for your stuff to run.
Do you have to acknowledge that message before it goes? Oh, nope, it's going. Woohoo!
Okay, yep. So once the message I had been ignoring for too long timed out. Here's the PowerShell that was created and run using all of the tricks that we'd normally have to use to get these to run. So that's the real beauty of the new, it's not that new a feature, but it's a very useful feature in allowing you to execute PowerShell directly. Now, I do want to show a bit about parameterizing this, because the way I did it, I hard-coded it. And so it was going to send to the specific box that I wanted to target that had the listener on it to be able to validate. So actually, let me pause for a moment. Gary, how are we on possibly doing the second piece of demo? Are we green light, red light at the moment? You're on mute.
Gary is focused.
Red light at the moment, but
thank you. That's all I needed. All I needed. I'll check back with you later, and we'll see if we can do the second part or not. Okay, so parameterizing this, right? Because I hard-coded some stuff here. In the native PowerShell fashion, I won't be able to variabilize these, but I can get them in as variables. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a copy of. No, let's go back to Notepad++ and grab. Here's my pieces, and I'm going to create a tools new fixlet. And this is going to be the client. With parameter. Okay, and I'm going to, instead of using the PowerShell type, which would just let me put pre-digested PowerShell in, I'm going to use ActionScript, and I'm going to start with
And for all of you non-BigFix people, this is going to start to look a little scary. I've in the chat thrown an example template for you so that you won't have to do all the things that John's doing right now, and can just sort of paste your PowerShell into the body of the example template.
Yep. So create file until some marker, and I just used a bunch of X's because I don't think that marker exists anywhere else. So it should basically create a file that's all this stuff all the way down to the X's. In here, there's going to be some curly braces. And curly braces in ActionScript means there's relevance in here. So when the client when the client takes this action, it's going to say, oh, this stuff in here is relevance, but it's not. This is a literal curly brace. And so what I want to do is I want to take all my curly braces, Control find, how is it? Control H, is it? Yeah, curly braces, and replace it with double curly braces. This escapes the curly brace and lets the action engine know what's in here isn't really relevance. This is a real curly brace, treated as a real curly brace, not as a signal that there's relevance. Okay, so I'm going to replace all those.
And done. John, for everybody else here, what's the hotkey you use to bring up find and replace?
Control H. So that took care of that piece for me, right? So now I've got my PowerShell with all the curlies are escaped, and that should be the only thing I need to worry about escaping there. But in here for this is going to be my client, right? And this is going to be the name of the target that I want to test this on. So I'm going to do this. what do we want to call this parameter? Let's call it Bob. I like Bob. Bob's a great name. So actually, this will be the client name. That's a much more descriptive name that'll be useful if I'm reading this later, because who the heck knows what Bob is? So I want the
action parameter query.
That's the one. I'm gonna have to look up the syntax on this, guys. Good
So
thing
while you're doing
know where
that,
to
John,
find it.
yeah, while you're doing that, I'm gonna throw some questions out there. So one question, with more and more people working remotely, how much can we really depend on UDP?
The answer is you cannot. I mean, it's pretty simple, right? Like it just isn't likely to happen. There are mitigating things you can use inside of the BigFix client to help this out. I mentioned by default, the poll rate that the client uses is just very, very slow. So if you don't get UDP open to those clients, by default, they're just not going to respond to new stuff in any reasonable time frame. The solution to this is called command polling. It's not really on by default. It has that 1-day interval, which is not super useful. But you can configure it to pretty much anything you want. And that basically tells the client to check in with its relay every X number of minutes, however long you set, and look for new content. Setting this too fast, like if you set it down to 1 or 2 minutes, can be really bad for performance. So you're never really going to get super responsive behavior out of your clients by turning on command polling. But we've had customers successfully use, without blowing up their implementation, numbers in like the 15-minute range. Like that's really aggressive still quite fast, but it doesn't kill stuff. We would generally recommend, at most maybe set your command poll to 1 hour. That's not necessarily fast enough to like respond to, I don't know, a cybersecurity incident, right? Like that's still not super fast, but it's a whole lot better than a day.
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage everyone to test, like determine what your requirements are, like what exactly do you need your client to respond to, configure to your requirements, but also keep an eye on your performance. This is again where having a good relationship with your network team is really handy, because typically it would be like, you would see too many TCP requests flooding your network if this is set too fast, or maybe your relays will stop responding, and your network guys will be able to see that.
Great. Okay. So John's been busy typing lots of cool stuff. What did you do, John?
Yep, give me a second, I'm almost there. So I need
Okay, then I'll ask another question. Is there a difference how this will behave against computers with Microsoft PowerShell installed versus Windows PowerShell installed? So the built-in version versus the latest version of PowerShell. Does it make a difference, or will it work regardless?
It will work regardless. Boy, I don't know which one it will use. That is a fantastic question. I don't think it doesn't have its own engine. It will use whatever is in the 32-bit Windows directory. So if you were to install PowerShell discretely and it goes to like program files, it wouldn't hit that first. It will go to wherever is in Windows syswow 64.
Great. Yeah, the other question that they have is, can you force a particular PowerShell version? So version 7 versus 5 or something like that.
In the ActionScript version of this, you most certainly can. So you will be calling whatever executable you want. We wouldn't, I would not recommend directly calling just the script file, right? You would always call PowerShell.exe from whatever directory you want. So in that way, you can force any version. Through the native PowerShell command, there is not. It will just use whatever is in the Windows directory.
Great, thanks. Okay, John, you ready?
I am. I'm saving the fix it off now, and then I will show you the lines I added and what they do. But before I want to do that, I want to go back to that question of which version of PowerShell. When you use the native, inbuilt action that goes directly to PowerShell, you can see right in the log exactly which, well, if it doesn't move around, exactly which PowerShell was used. In this case, it was in the sysnative folder. Windows PowerShell v1 PowerShell exe is exactly what it was called.
Okay.
And I believe that would be pretty much standard for any version of the OS that you're using. This is the one it's going to find. So if you've got other versions installed or you wanted to use other versions, you would want to use the second methodology that doesn't use the inbuilt, that uses instead the build a fixlet and embed your PowerShell, which is kind of the old way of doing it. So if you have to be very particular about it, we do have the flexibility to get there if you need it.
Okay.
So to walk you through, what did I put into this action script? I probably should have put some relevance too, but I'm going fast for us. Actions uses WOW64 redirection. What does this do? This is telling the action script, do we want to use the 64-bit or the 32-bit, depending on the OS. And this, I could have said true or false here, but in this case, I said not 64-bit. So if it runs on a 64-bit, 64-bit will be true and not true will be false, and so it won't use the redirection. If it's 64-bit, if it's not 64-bit, then 64-bit will be false and not false is true, and then it will use the redirection. The action parameter query, I got this right off of BigFix, developer.bigfix.com. This allows me to put in at action time something that's going to pop up to the console user and allow me to have a variable that I then use later in the script. I just deleted the create file in case it was there. The create file just dumps text into a file. And which text is it going to dump? It's going to dump every line until it gets to a bunch of X's. So it's going to put all of these lines in until it gets all the way down to the X's. The only other piece I changed here was this one right here. And I actually made a mistake, and I just saw my mistake. I'm going to go back and edit. I'm going to fix that error. And that is, I didn't put the double quotes around this, and this is expecting a string. So I'm going to put those double quotes outside of those curly braces. And those curly braces says relevance is in here. And what relevance is it going to be? The parameter from the action named client name, which is going to be this one right here that we end up typing in. So I can get from the console typing in all the way to my PowerShell on the endpoint when it executes using this technique. That's it. For the top part, at the bottom, all I'm doing is making sure there's not a file already called PowerShell.ps1, and then I'm moving my create file to be this file, the PowerShell. So that's going to be whatever's typed up here along with the relevance substitution. And then I'm going to use, instead of wait hidden, this is actually going to be a run hidden in my case. And I'll tell you why, because this thing, I expect it to fire and go away. So I don't want the BigFix agent to sit around waiting for this to exit. I want it to just run and go to its next thing.
Hey, John, just FYI, I'm green light, I believe.
You are which?
He's bringing up his version if we want to play with that too.
Let me finish this piece of the walkthrough, and then I'm going to turn it over to Gary. Gary's going to actually show us adding to a domain using a secure parameter to keep that parameter safe, which is a kind of a more advanced technique that builds on the PowerShell idea. So this piece here looks up in the registry, where is PowerShell installed, so that it uses the PowerShell that is registered with the registry when it executes. So it's going to invoke PowerShell, and it's going to pass the execution policy as bypass, and it's going to say run this PowerShell file. And that's what's going to fire this PowerShell with all the changes. I'm going to click OK. I am going to go ahead and run a quick test, and then I'm going to show you the client log, and then I'm going to pass it over to Gary to show us the next piece of the demo. And we are at about 41, so we got about 20 minutes to finish all and get questions in. Okay,
Absolutely.
take the action. Yes, Rhonda?
Nope, all good.
Okay. All right, so I just pressed take action, and it's going to ask me, hey, what's the client name I want to pass? I like the word Bob, so I'm going to pass Bob. And I'm going to press OK, and it's going to then take me to the targeting. And so Bob has been selected. I don't have a computer named Bob, so this is going to fail. But let's target it at this one, because I can see the client logs on that one very easily. And we'll go ahead and do messages too. Sure. Bob. And we'll do Bob here as well. Okay, and I've got a target. There we go. And it's going to target, actually, yeah, that should be perfect. So on my root server in the client log, there's the action coming down. We should see a pre-action. There's my pre-action, and I want to run this one. Let's take the action, and let's snooze that one for 12 hours, please. Okay. Okay, the UI was clicked, so in just a minute we should see things here. Yep, there's the Bob is starting. Okay, so it tried to delete this file that didn't exist. That's fine. It created the file. It then deleted this other file that didn't exist, and that no failure to report. Then we moved this create file over to PowerShell, and then we ran it, and it ran. Let's take a quick look in here. There's the PowerShell that was created by this action. And here, hey, look, Bob made it into our PowerShell before it executed. That's exactly what I wanted to see. We got that all the way through from the console all the way to the endpoint for execution. Any open questions on this piece before I turn it over to Gary?
No, I mean, we have a lot of questions about, TCP, or some recommendations around TCP, UDP troubleshooting. Using the iPerf tool is a great way to do that. Some commentary about persistent connections are your friend. I don't know, Joe, if you want to comment on persistent connections in the context of UDP or not UDP.
Yeah, I mean, persistent connections are great. The design purpose, well, let's describe them for a second here. Persistent connections allow notifications to go down through TCP to endpoints rather than through UDP. And then the client that has the persistent connection to its relay will send notifications within its own subnet over UDP to all the other clients that are on its subnet. So like the design goal of it was, if you have like a bunch of satellite networks where you maybe don't want to put a whole relay, like you have, I don't know, 15 endpoints in a store somewhere, and it doesn't make sense to put a server there because there's 15 endpoints. This allows them to remain responsive with just the one TCP connection. The main issue with that design for most people in the remote age is the default number of connections is 100. So we can only make 100 of these persistent connections to a relay at one time. That's for performance reasons, right? We don't necessarily want to see 5,000 permanently open TCP connections to a high scale relay. Like, I have some customers that have tried something like that, and in the 1 to 2,000 range, they haven't necessarily exploded, but it's way past the design intent. Use at your own risk for that use case where you're not, having one client that has a bunch of other clients on its own subnet.
Makes sense.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to get off of the screen, and Gary, if you would like to walk us through the next use case, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, give me a second. I need to figure out that monitor. You should be seeing a browser.
Yes, we see add computer to Active Directory, domain join.
Okay, great. So I'm going to leverage another piece of content that's publicly available. It's out on bigfix.me. It was written by Michael Thompson originally. I've not, well, I have made a modification, not to the code per se, but to the user interface. So what I have done is I've added a few additional parameters. So this is the area of change. The bottom line is this is still a implementation leveraging PowerShell scripting. In this case, it is a BigFix ActionScript. We do embed the PowerShell script itself within the ActionScript of the fixer. We then call PowerShell on the endpoint together with the execution policy bypass, which we've spoken about before. One thing I'm not too sure if it was mentioned during some of the previous demonstrations. When you do execute PowerShell on the endpoint, there can be situations where you are calling commands or modules that may not be installed on that machine. So of course you would want to test these fixlets on a machine that's really representative of what you have out there within your company. Or you could also add code to test for the existence of those modules and then install them if you really require them if they're missing. Anyway.
Gary, could you install them in the ActionScript itself, like not have to have a separate thing and just have them install if they're missing?
So of course the action's running in the context of the local system account. But for example, if I was to look on this machine, you should be able to do, now of course I've forgotten what it is, get module. I think get module would do the install. So you could basically do a check to see if a module was there or a function was there, and if it was missing, call the install. I'm open to correction on the exact implementation there.
And this is a classic example of the two sides of this whole thing, where you have synergies between your BigFix guy and your PowerShell guy. And in this case, your PowerShell guy should be able to tell you what modules need to be installed, and then the BigFix guy can go implement them.
Exactly. So in this use case, we are going to require some input, and you can see right here there are a number of parameters that are required. We need a domain account that has all the rights and privileges to join a machine to a domain, the name of the domain, and an OU if you want the machine to be located within a particular OU, etc. And here are those input parameters. So in my case, this is my domain account, which is in clear text as we would need it to be. The password, of course, we do not want to have visible, so that is a protected field. I want this to be joined to one of my domains, and then the OU itself, I'm going to pick up from the domain controller. This is the particular OU I'd like to see my machine joined to. This is the OU right here. There are no machines there at this point in time, but I'm going to specify that right here. And then the machine that I'm going to target is this guy right here. And if I quickly flip back to that machine and look at the properties, advanced system settings, and the computer, you'll see it's in a work group right at this time. What we expect to see is a command shell get run and executed on this target through a BigFix action, which in turn will execute the necessary PowerShell commands to join this machine to the domain. The machine will get rebooted, which is a requirement when you do the domain join. And then we should see a computer object within the domain controller itself, within the OU that we had specified. So let's check this out and see if it actually works.
And while we're waiting for that to execute, I want to make a note on the secure parameter that is in this. So the original fixlet that we got off of BigFix Me has a secure parameter for the password parameter. So secure parameters are encrypted kind of end to end from the agent. So it's never shown, right? Like nothing in that password is ever visible anywhere in the chain. Getting to the creation of the secure parameter is surprisingly difficult. It's actually like a JavaScript library that you have to call from inside of the description of the fixlet, and there's no UI for it, right? It's something you have to do within the XML itself of the .bez file. So it's hidden, surprisingly difficult. For sure, reach out for help if you need any sort of help implementing a secure parameter for your use case.
Okay, sorry, there was a few seconds delay there because I forgot to actually create the action. But now that I have, you can see it's been received on the endpoint, and so that should execute.
Oh, it looks like I inadvertently answered a question out of the Q&A. Way to go, me.
I did. What was the question?
Joe, which one did you answer, Joe?
Oh, somebody asked about secure parameters and hand coding them, and yes, that is true. That is
okay. And I'm sorry, I got a little distracted in getting this going. Did you talk about action log at all, Joe?
We mentioned it, or I mentioned it earlier. What you guys are seeing on screen right now is what the default is. So, you know, we see very little detail in any of this. If inside the action, Gary had added action log all right at the top of it, we would see very verbose output here, like all of the data. The important thing to note is that it must be like the operator who takes the action has to turn it on per action. This is not a client setting, so you can't have like an attacker go turn this on for all actions and just see all of your stuff.
Okay, there is something a little weird and unexpected. This is not the one from the ActionScript. That was that one there. And it is completed creating the script file, but I don't see it executing the script file. So I'm not seeing an instance of PowerShell being spawned from that action.
Well, we're batting what, 2 for 3 here, so that's not so bad for a on-the-spot live demo.
Okay. So I did get a failure back. Let's see what that is trying to tell us. And I know what the problem is. I'm so sorry. I do know what the problem is. I've done a restore of my database, and so my fixlet is out of sync. I had a piece within the fixlet. Actually, if I go back to the fixlet, I had a piece in here where I was doing a copy of the shell, and I had not, this should be commented out. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this, and instead of losing this input, I'm going to take action one more time. And I'm going to quickly, on the fly, make a modification. It's failing on this copy because a file already exists, and we will not copy over a file that already exists. And this problem is because I did a database restore. So I'm going to select the same target, create the same action, of course, go back to that endpoint, and this time, hey, I've already executed my domain join through that PowerShell script. It's doing a reboot of the endpoint. If I then go back to my domain controller and do a refresh on this, actually, can I do a refresh? I'm not too sure if that's a thing. And I'm not too sure if the computer object only gets created after the reboot. I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, wait.
Oh, it is a refresh. There we go. There it is right there, right now.
Amazing.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, the PowerShell script did exactly what it did. It received all of the input parameters, of course, the domain account, the domain password, the OU, the domain name, all of that good stuff. It did execute as it was supposed to. The restart of the machine, of course, was not incorporated within the PowerShell script that ran its normal action commands. John, again, because I was busy with some of this stuff, I didn't pay full attention to what you were doing. Did you get the full demonstration of the send and receive?
We did enough on that one. I do want you to show your client logs, though. Show us that the password that you typed in, which is sensitive, doesn't even show up in the client logs.
Oh,
it's not
yeah.
in the file. It's not in the database. It's encrypted everywhere with that secure parameter. So secure parameters is a way to get things around pretty darn securely.
So there was a question on that. So yes, encrypted end to end, which is great, but do secrets still require a client mailbox site exist for that endpoint so that you can't use a dynamic group to drive a policy action? Do you have to go one by one if you're using a secure parameter? Yes.
That is correct. Yeah. The whole mechanism relies on the client certificate decrypting whatever your secure parameter is. And if you were to target it dynamically, we can't guarantee the client certificate exists. So it must be targeted individually.
Okay.
Yes, but if you're targeting, say, 6 different devices with the same script, if they all get the same password and send it out to the 6, it actually encrypts the decryption key for the message with the client's private cert, so that the clients they're supposed to be able to decrypt it can all decrypt it. It goes to all of their individual mailboxes. So you can still do sort of broadcast, but you cannot target by property. You have to target by mailbox, which does constrain you a little bit.
Okay, we are at the top of the hour. Is there any last things that we want to share? We took it right to the end.
We did. There were a couple questions we didn't get answered in the tool, but I think we pretty much covered them with dialogue along the way. I don't think we left anything that's especially outstanding. I had a great time with this, doing it live and doing it at risk. That was a lot of fun for me, so I hope everybody else enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, I don't think we mentioned at the top, because I didn't want to jinx it, but the whole reason we're doing this more ad hoc than usual is that we had a bit of a hypervisor explosion about 20 minutes before this started, and so all of our materials evaporated. So this was truly live. I hope it wasn't too terrible.
Yeah, definitely Grand Canyon. That's why I used that example. We were walking the tightrope over the Grand Canyon today. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, John, especially for stepping into the gap and walking that tightrope. The recording of the event will be available in about an hour. There is a post-event survey. I think it still says get more done with BigFix. Regardless, it's the decoded one. Please go ahead and do answer those. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you on the 27th, if not before. Thank you all so much.